Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I have 3 new colors of Rit DyeMore synthetic dye to play with. And I'm going to attempt to mix these colors today to create a fun rainbow colorway on some 100% acrylic yarn. I've already taken this ball of Studio Classic by Nicole yarn, here's some of the other information, and wound it into a circular skein from the ball that it was originally located in. And I have 100 grams of the yarn here today. Before I start talking about my thoughts and plans on this project, I would like to give a huge shout out and thank you to my lab partner today, Dawn. Dawn, thank you so much for encouraging me to play more with acrylic dyeing, and I really hope that this will turn out and that you will love the yarn. And I absolutely know that we're going to learn a lot. So again, thank you so much for being my lab partner. If you would like to learn how you could be a lab partner in a Dyepot Weekly video, pick a yarn base and tell me some colors to avoid, and then I'll design a video with you in mind, you can find more information in the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. With acid dyes, when I wanted to start mixing colors, I did this triangle color mixing exercise where I had 15 different samples, and it really helped to understand the proportions of red to yellow, red to blue, and so on. But there are a few reasons why I am not setting that up today, and we're gonna go and do some like trial and error based mixing and just look at the color of the liquid. The main reason for that is that with these Rit dyes, heat is an essential component to the dyeing process. The instructions even say that you must use at a stovetop with a high temperature. Now, Rebecca, you might ask, you do most of your dyeing on the stovetop at high temperatures. And yes, that is true. But Rit and a lot of other dyes have, for natural fibers, have some cool or washing machine based instructions which involve hot water, but not as high temperatures. And since it's harder to dye synthetics like acrylic and polyester, you have to use higher heat. And so therefore, if you have 15 samples, doing a cool vat and steaming them all together wouldn't quite work. And so it would require heating them each individually, which would take a lot longer. Now, I'm not opposed to doing this someday, but again, acrylic yarn doesn't exhaust all the dye, so I thought that it would be fun to start trying to play with this and see if I can mix a good rainbow. And then depending on the results, maybe we'll consider doing a triangle down the line. Going into this, there are a couple things that make me nervous. What we saw in a previous video, and when I've been playing with a green from this line, the green that I see on the yarn is very different from the liquid color that I mixed. And so therefore it's possible I'll mix liquid that looks like a really good rainbow, and then we'll have to take a step back and shift depending on the way that the colors work on the yarn, because it seemed like the purple worked a lot better than the green. So it's possible that not only does the mixture and proportions of colors make a difference, but it's possible that for certain colors you need to use a lot more dye to get that hue. So we'll see how this turns out and what we learn about these dyes. But yeah, the dyes do tend to look different on different fiber types. The other disclaimer that I'm going to give before we get started is that heat setting acrylic yarn can cause some melting. If you've ever tried to steam block a knit or crochet acrylic garment, you know that it'll help the fibers sort of like relax and hold that shape. And so in exposing these fibers to high heat, you do change the way that they look. But I have been really happy with the results from steam setting, and versus doing like an immersion type dyeing. I think not moving the yarn in the pot might help a little bit. But anyway, let's go get started. The three colors that we are going to use today are Daffodil Yellow, Racing Red, and Sapphire Blue. I believe that there might be a pink in the line, but in terms of primary colors, these are really the three choices that exist. There aren't a lot of options with the line, which is why mixing the colors to get ones you want could be really useful. And just like last time, I'm going to add a few butterfly ties to this yarn. So I'm putting this ribbon, I don't know why I'm using ribbon, through half, over, and then under. And so this sort of butterfly type tie will help prevent the ties from all ending up in one spot on the yarn and help just keep it from getting tangled. But I'm also going to add a reusable nylon zip tie because this is also just a handy way to do it. But if I were to add multiple of these ties, they just move around so easily, which is why I added the butterfly ties as well, which honestly is something I should be doing all the time. All the tools and equipment that I'm using today are dedicated for dyeing yarn and are not used for food. In each of these 3 cups, I have a 1/4 cup of water, and I am going to carefully add 1 tablespoon of the DyeMore synthetic dye to each of them so we can do some really crude but measured mixing. And I'm going to rinse this off between going for the colors. Shaking up the bottles each time. They are sealed, which is something that I forgot, but I am trying to avoid splatter because this stuff will stain. I do have my work surface protected, so that's the Daffodil Yellow, which is looking very brown right now. I've protected my work surface with this shower curtain right here that just from IKEA, and I always like wipe it down and clean it in between different things. And the fact that the yellow is not bright at all right now is something to consider because it's gonna be imperfect to look at these colors as they appear here in the containers. But it is also possible that this yellow is not a bright yellow and that the yellow, I mean, I guess it does look a little bit mustardy on the container, but the color I see in there is more like that deep yellow that we see on the Rit symbol, which honestly, that's the color that we see here with the red and the color we see here with the blue. So maybe that is a more accurate representation of what those colors actually are. Interesting. Okay, I'm now going to stir up each of these colors using these little disposable pipettes, which, you know, I'll wash and reuse. I haven't used them in a while, but they do have graduated markings on them, so you can crudely measure up to 2 milliliters. But let's see, I guess first on a paper towel, let's see what each of these colors are on their own. So if I take a drop of our red, a drop of our yellow, and a drop of our blue. The red and blue are way more pigmented than the yellow. So I think when it comes to mixing a green and an orange, I want to start with more yellow being present. So let's go ahead and do 1.5 milliliters of yellow. And then let's just do 1/2 milliliter of blue and 1.5 approximately of red. I've got another one of these little pipettes and I'm going to stir this mixture right here . Hey, that's actually a pretty good orange. That orange is pretty good. It's a little more red leaning than I'm going for, but it's not bad for a first attempt. It certainly reads as orange. Then for this green, similarly, the green is in the green family. I think that for this, I might want a little bit more blue in the green and a little bit more yellow in our orange is my first thought. One other thing it might be, you can kind of read on camera, there is some breaking with that blue. The blue is spreading out more. And while we're at it, we haven't looked at a purple yet. So let's try a 1-to-1 blue to red and see where that brings us. Now, I happen to have both a purple and a green, but they're older and these are all new. So let's see this purple. This looks very much like a grape Kool-Aid to me. It's certainly in the purple realm. It's a very red purple, so I think I'm gonna want more blue. Okay, now let's try 2-to-1 blue to red. So there's twice as much blue as there is red there. And for the green, let's try 1-to-1 blue to yellow. And so we did 3-to-1 before. Let's just try 4-to-1. So I'm gonna do, why can't I measure that high? There we go. 2 milliliters of yellow and a half of red. And let's take a look at this next iteration. So here is our orange that is so that's not substantially different. I do think that the first orange, it's actually a little more yellow. Maybe it's a little less red. So they're very, very subtle, but maybe that's the one to go with. I think that's a good orange. Let's check our green. Oh, that is very, very blue. So it's interesting the way that they're mixing. I think we might not, I think that this, even though it's not looking green anymore, where was that original green? Here it is. Yeah, I think that this is a lot more green. And so even though it didn't look it over there versus the new one, which does read more blue. So I think that this is the green that we're gonna have to go with, even though it does feel fairly dirty. And then finally, this purple. Oh, that's a better purple. That's a much better purple. So the final purple I like is 2 parts blue to 1 part red. The orange that I like is 4 parts yellow to 1 part red. And then the best green, ooh, now I'm not sure, because like when it breaks, that green in the center is looking really nice. But on its own, let's check the greens one more time. So this is our first green, which is very mossy. And then our second green on its own looks like a slate blue. So I think that the 3 parts yellow to 1 part blue is the green that is the best for us to go with. So I would say that this is probably the closest that I can achieve with just crudely mixing and testing to sort of try to shift those colors to get where I want. The little like paint tray that's white actually worked really, really helpful for mixing small amounts to try to feel where I wanted to end up. But we know that some of these dyes look really, really different on different yarns and yarn contents. So it's very possible that what we see, or it's extraordinarily possible that what we see when we paint the yarn is going to look very, very different from what it is steamed. And this is why doing a triangle color exercise is probably somewhat worthwhile, but with, again, an asterisk that the colors are probably going to look really, really different depending on the exact type of acrylic or polyester that you're dyeing. Even if that base color looks very, very similar, I think just the way the pigments in there react with the yarn and the parts that don't. So let's try to do this and see if we can get a rainbow. I added another 1/4 cup of water plus a tablespoon of each of the 3 dye types to our original little stock containers. And then I mixed our 3 secondary colors using the following recipes. 60 milliliters of yellow and 20 milliliters of blue for our green, 40 milliliters of yellow and 10 milliliters of red, and then finally 40 milliliters of blue and 20 milliliters of red. And since I used up most of the yellow, I then added another tablespoon of dye to that cup with another 1/4 cup of water, just so that way hopefully I'd have enough total volume to hand paint our 100 grams of yarn. So in total, I think we have around 4 tablespoons of the Rit DyeMore synthetic measured out here. And here is our approximate rainbow that I've mixed with these 3 colors. So now let's start hand painting the yarn. We are going to hand paint this yarn on the countertop and then steam set it in a steamer basket, since we do require heat for this type of technique. Now, I mentioned I did pre-soak this yarn in some plain tap water and then just let it sit while we were doing all of this measuring. And now I'm using this syringe to apply some of the dye, and I'm going to press to work it through. One thing I didn't check is that Rit might have some recipe suggestions on their website. So that's not something that I have checked or that I'm aware of at the moment. But if you wanted to mix colors, they might have, some brands sometimes share some suggestions on proportions of colors to mix. So that's just worth considering for the future if you're going to be trying this on your own. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I have some color left, because I think we will flip the yarn and add it to the other side. The reason why I'm doing sort of this more repeating rainbow style instead of doing 6 sections of color total is that it's going to be easier to keep them from bleeding onto each other like this. But since I have defined for myself this proportion of color of for each of our secondary colors, and that my quote stocks are 1 tablespoon of dye plus 1/4 cup of water, that means that I do have the ability to mix more dye if I need more in a particular color as things go on. So that's the main reason why I did some things the way I did, just for consistency. So right now our purple looks very, very purple, which is good because that's what we want. I'm going to go rinse my hands. Since I am massaging the dyes into place, I do not want to transfer color, especially when we get to the yellow. That is one color that is always sort of at risk. But I think at first, when I'm positioning these colors, I am going to leave a little gap that we can then fill in and expand before we flip. So that is my plan here. Sometimes I use various things or pouring when I'm hand painting yarn like this to apply the dye. I'm choosing to use the syringes because I have them out, and also it leads to very little splashing, and so that is helpful. Very helpful. Now I'm coming for our green, and I did not rinse the the syringe in between going from the green to the blue because I knew that I didn't think that a tiny bit more blue would make a huge difference. There we go. I definitely want more pigment there. I have no idea what this green will look like whatsoever. But I am certainly extremely curious about it. And some of the color in these sections looks pretty even right now. There's going to be tonal variation in each of the sections. I think, like, from when I've done low immersion with these acid dyes, I'm sort of liking these white gaps. Maybe I'm not going to fill them in and we can see how the colors spread. I'm going back and forth on that. We'll see. We'll see how things look after I add it. But certainly that would be a fun colorway on its own. I have no idea what this will look like in the end. If our yellow will look more like mustard like this, if it'll look brighter yellow. Some of these colors may end up looking really, really pastel in the end. But as I mentioned, that heat that we're gonna add is critical. All right, I guess I'm not gonna be adding white or keeping the white because you can see as the yellow has just like already closed that gap. But certainly that would be a fun colorway. Okay, and now our orange. The orange is, okay, now when I press it in, it does look more orange. Pressing it in, the orange does look more orange and less red. Now, if I had the option to pick a cyan, a magenta, and a, if I had that choice to pick those colors instead of the ones that I did end up picking here today, then I probably would have done that. I think that my preference would have been to start with those brighter hues, but while I believe that there's a pink in the line, I don't think that there's a comparable bright blue, and so that is the big reason why I stuck with things where I did. And now you can see as I am pressing, I am starting to blend these colors together. Not a lot, but a little bit. And we might see more on the underlayer as we go through. But I'm trying to focus a bit on our primaries just because I have the most of those. And so focusing here on these edges. And then before heading over to our yellow and green border and giving that some love. But this is really pretty. I'm gonna wipe up this plastic wrap a bit before I flip, just to keep things sort of where they are. And when I flip it, we're gonna put them down. I'm trying to focus mostly for the yellow's sake. I didn't want to flip and put the yellow down on top of the orange. That is something that I absolutely wanted to avoid. Okay, and now, I think since there are given spots that I know where I want more, part of me is tempted to just pour, but I think I am gonna stick with the syringes and with this application that I have been doing all along, just for consistency. I think that that makes the most sense. But this is going really well and I think is really, really pretty. Now, I want to add as much dye as possible, but you will notice that when I lifted the yarn, it was not dripping. And that is very, very, very important. If the yarn is dripping, then colors will bleed into each other. That is not something that I would be able to prevent. That's the last of that blue. But if I need more, the blue is an easy one to mix more of because I have that. I mean, I guess they're all easy to mix more of, but yeah, in general with wool, I find that about 2 to 3 cups of water is around the max that I can like fit without it starting to spill out. But different colors are definitely more absorbent than others, so that's important to keep in mind, especially when you're using a yarn base that maybe you're not as familiar with, like me right now using this. And so as for, you know, that proportion and using 3 to 4 tablespoons of dye on here total, this is around something that I found to work. And unlike when I was attempting this with a low immersion kind of situation, this time, since the dyes are more concentrated on the fibers, there is a chance, I think, for more of it to have more deep color coverage, I think. So with the yellow, since I had mixed more of it, I am going to cross it over into these other areas a little bit more, starting in the center and then working it out just to blend things a little bit. And because I have that dye. So, yeah. But the nice thing is that I very much mixed by feel today, but it was a very measured feel, which means that we know the proportions that we used. And so therefore that is something that, depending on how this rainbow looks after we steam set it, we know some information, and so therefore we know how we want to shift these colors going forward. But what I'm going to do now is go set up the steamer basket and let it start to get hot. So in the meantime, I'm going to let this sit here for, I don't know, probably 5 or maybe 10 minutes while I go ahead and do that. I don't think that this wait time is significant, but I do want to point it out just in case maybe it does make a difference. I don't know. All right, this steamer basket is nice and steamy, so now we are going to wrap this up and transfer it to the stove top. Put that there. And the reason for wrapping, and I'm being very careful and not pushing while I'm wrapping, because while we don't want to force the color out. And okay, it's not dripping, but I'm going to quickly go put this in the steamer basket. Okay, so the jelly roll is now in the steamer basket. I'm going to put the lid on so it can be nice and steamy, and we're going to go ahead and steam it, I think, for an hour to give maximum heat. I cannot remember what I've done in the past when I steamed, but it does say 30 minutes up to an hour. So that's what we are going to do. But when we did a low immersion, the dye seemed to strike pretty quickly. So even in the situations after we added the color spread all over, but that didn't seem to strike anymore after like a bit of an initial exposure. So we'll see, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed. Certainly, I can think of an experiment we could do by seeing, like, you could do different lengths of time to see how that could shift the color or how much time is really needed to do this. I don't dye acrylic yarn enough to necessarily do that, but if you want more acrylic dyeing videos and want me to explore and play with this more, please let me know down in the comments below. So unfortunately, while I did see you can use this dye on wool and it worked, rinsing it out was a nightmare and not something I want to repeat. So therefore I am going to dispose of this extra dye. Thankfully I did use most of it. There's only like a tiny bit left of these colors, and so I'm going to do that and clean this up really, really well, so that way we can avoid staining my home. But otherwise, I'll be back when we can take a look at the dye pot again. Okay, it has been about an hour, and I'm now going to remove the lid, turn off the heat, and I'm not going to touch the yarn yet. I do want to point out that we do definitely have some leaking and some spilling of some colors, but doesn't necessarily mean that everything combined. I do see from here, I don't necessarily see the yellow, but I see some green going into blue, and I see a more yellow-green there, but it's covered, so I can't tell yet. And then our purple is looking bluish. So we will have to wait and see, but I'm gonna let this cool. I think here, just in the steamer basket, even though it is still over, and I'm not sure how well, because it's steamy, you can see that color did leak down below. So I will just leave it here in the pot versus taking it somewhere else, just so I don't make a mess. But once things are cool, then we can go ahead and wash it. All right, let's take a look at this yarn. I am going to start adding some warm water to the pan and try to unwrap this. And let's see what colors we see. All right, I see purple and blue, not very much yellow. Oh man. We'll see if stuff rinses out. I do want to rinse. Okay, there's a chance that we could see some yellow come back, but I also don't want to hold my breath on it. So quickly rinsing, I see some hints of yellow, but I think that, like, oh my gosh, look at all that coming out. I think that, like, a lot of yellows that we see, oh, no, there's some definite yellow left. It's a golden yellow, and it definitely, the orange is actually really subtle too. So there's some golden hints. It's just not, I think as far as yellow goes, it's possible that it is a more golden yellow. But so far, ooh, look at that green. It's very teal hints. I mean, this actually, I think, worked pretty well. We could probably need to do more to try to preserve some of that yellow. It looks like a lot of the blue sort of shifted. The purple also is not looking very purple. It's looking a lot more indigo, I would say. But, I mean, the hues that we created are all definitely in here. I just added some dish soap. The water is definitely not clear yet, but we are a lot more clear than we were before. I am using warm water for this right now, and in a moment I'll remove my gloves. It's unclear how much all the stuff that initially rinses out has staining power, because, like, I don't know, I'm typically just afraid of this dye staining thing, but it should come out of my pot, and honestly, like, that's not bad. The first time I tried using this dye, I think I used about half of the bottle, and I used it on a few different fiber types to see what it could dye, if it could dye wool acrylic blends and things like that. And it was really, really, really hard to rinse out of those wool acrylic blends. So that was incredibly difficult. Whereas right now, there's subtle amounts of some bleeding, but it is coming out. So, goodness, I'm now wondering if I had more blue, I feel like maybe I should have gone for the 1-to-1 of blue to red for that more pink purple. Since this ended up feeling bluer overall, then maybe that pink purple would have been a bluer purple versus more of an indigo color. But we're still seeing some bleeding. The ribbons took on some beautiful color. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep washing. You know, this isn't that much bleeding. I think that you could knit with this without it getting on your fingers or anything. The fibers are definitely flattened very differently from how they were in, and I'll be able to compare to the other. Oh, I should have saved a snip of this to compare at the end, but I can compare it to the other one. I think that the steaming technique definitely made the fibers themselves just a little bit flat, but man, the colors are great. So yeah, I mean, we'll have conclusions in a minute. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and rinse this a few more times until I can get the water as clear as possible. It's so close given how much color we started with already. But then I'm gonna put it through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll come back for some conclusions. But I think that with a couple colors, you can definitely mix things to transform some acrylic that you have that maybe you want to transform into something else. So anyway, I will see you in just a moment. Here is the finished yarn, and we learned a lot. I would say that the most potent of the three colors that I worked with today were, the first was the blue. By far, that blue was so potent. Next, the red, and then finally the yellow. The red that we have here, even though it looked bright when wet, is more softer, a rosy pink. And so therefore, in our purple section, it didn't make as big of an impact as it looked like it might have. So rather than needing more blue, like I originally thought, it seems like we would have needed more red. The orange also, I think, is paler than I thought that what we would get. I was worried it would feel a little too red, and it feels a little too yellow, so I'm a bit surprised about that. The greens are gorgeous. I think that this sort of teal from the blue and this medium green is just absolutely stunning. So overall, and the fact we did lose not all the yellow, but a lot of yellow. I did try to keep the yellow section rather large, and the colors did sort of encroach on it, which is fine. So I think that for an attempt to create a rainbow out of 3 DyeMore synthetic primary colors, this was a really good first attempt. And so hopefully from this you can learn and try to tweak your recipes going forward if you want to try this project. Steaming did not do us a lot of favors when it came to the yarn texture. It's less staticky than when I had low immersion, but it has compressed, it is flattened, it's more ribbon-esque than it was before. While I don't have some of the bare yarn to compare to itself, I do have some of this yarn that is the exact same base that we did with immersion dyeing. And the immersion dyeing absolutely kept more of the roundness, more of the integrity of the yarn. There is a little bit more flattening, but maybe the heat was less overall than the heat of the steaming. Technique-wise, I think that it's hard to say what is the best thing to do. The immersion dyeing damaged the yarn less, but it did not have the same impact in terms of color. And we used similar total amounts of color on both of these skeins, which is making me think that the concentration of dye when the heat is applied is important. At least this is what I'm hypothesizing. So maybe the steam needed to be at a lower temperature so then it wouldn't, quote, kill the fibers like it did. Or maybe it doesn't need to steam for a full hour. Maybe it really does need a lot less time. So Dawn, I don't know the best way to do this with yarn. But I do think that we learned something here. And so what I would recommend trying on maybe small amounts of yarn at a time would be trying to do some steam setting, but maybe at a very low temperature, or gosh, I don't know. I'm not sure the best way to do immersion dyeing with this for a variegated yarn, especially because the way that the colors worked on the immersion ended up being so random, which was really, really fun. I'm just not entirely sure how it would work with some of this rainbow mixture. But certainly trying these same rainbow proportions and doing a low immersion setup is something else that could be explored in the future. Texturally, the yarn does feel a little stiff. It's not rough, but it's not as soft as it was before. So I'm not sure what my official recommendations are. Even though I've done a few videos with this, overall it is still so new to me. I've tried so many dyes and techniques on wool-based yarn that I have a little more idea of what to expect. And yeah, I'm certainly not an expert dyeing acrylic, but if you enjoy my willingness to give different things a try, things that are new to me, and share my whole experience on YouTube, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I love trying new things, even if I'm a little nervous. And I think that, you know, for color-wise, I think that this worked really, really great. I'm disappointed that the texture is so flat, but I will admit I didn't go re-watch my whole videos from when I've done this in the past to remind myself of some of these things. So maybe future Rebecca, maybe you'll remember that that's what you wanted to do next time. Dawn, thank you so much for being my lab partner today and asking me to dive back in to exploring adding color to acrylic yarn. This is actually a question that I get a lot, and I really appreciate the nudge to explore this more. And again, if you would like to learn more about how you as a viewer can become a lab partner and get shoutouts and yarn dyed in an episode of Dyepot Weekly, you can find links to the listings in the ChemKnits Creations shop in the video description. As a lab partner, you get to pick the yarn base and tell me some colors to avoid, and I'll design a video with you in mind. But if you have a particular suggestion or idea, reach out to me in advance and we'll see if it's something that I think I can execute, or at least try to execute. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you all so much for watching.